What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Hawks Film Room podcast. Apologies for the delay. I've been traveling a little bit over the weekend, but we're right back to it. Hawks had a pretty interesting loss for all things considered, considering the state of the roster last night. But before we get into it, please make sure you like, subscribe, tell someone about the podcast. Yes, the Hawks were extremely short-handed last night. Ended up losing 92-100 against the Minnesota Timberwolves in Minnesota. So I'm pleased to bring on Jonah from Zone Coverage Minnesota. Uh, Twitter Huncho_J-Man. Love the film breakdowns. Love what you do with the Wolves. So really excited to have this conversation with you today, bro.
Happy to be here, man.
For sure. So I really just want to get straight into it. From the Hawks perspective, I think a dude who stood out for me, it has to be DeAndre Hunter. And it's funny because he tied his career high at 35, got buckets all night. Still finished with 1 assist and 3 turnovers. The ball was not popping when he had it in his hands, but I think he was tasked with, like, look, we don't have a ton of offensive help tonight. I'm just gonna go out there and play my game, and that's exactly what he did. 35 points, 57% from the field, 4 for 8 from 3. But the most important thing to me was he took 8 free throws. And for Hawks fans in particular, we have been a little bit frustrated with him throughout his career because he's 6'8". He doesn't always play like he's 6'8". I think he embraced physicality. He was attacking a Wolves defense that has a lot of size and length. And so I was very impressed with the offensive output of him. What did you think from what you saw from him last night?
I mean, it was just weird to see him in that role because you are never going to see DeAndre Hunter in this situation where he's getting that ball down him. Like, there were some shots he took that for sure weren't great, but I mean, there was a lot of really good flashes where he was reading things like people going under screens, pulling up on
Yeah.
that, like things that you would like him to see him do more frequently within the context of everyone being healthy. But I mean, he's just having a great season. Simple as that. Like it's fun to see. I don't want to call it a second win. It's just because he's older as a prospect, I feel like. But it's just good to see him kind of take a little bit more of a leap this season because he's always had the talent to be this high impact player, whether it's off the bench or as a fifth starter, wherever you want to have him.
Yeah, it was kind of jarring. I mean, he was running pick and roll. I was like, I don't even know who this dude is anymore. Um, and he actually drew 8 fouls last night. So he had 8 free throws, but he drew 8. I'm checking right now. Um, he does not get to the line that frequently. Like his career high is 9 fouls drawn in one game. And this is only the second time in his career that he's had second season in his career that he's had multiple games above 8 fouls drawn. And so I think the processing has gotten a lot better. Of course, the shot making has always been somewhat special. Like, I think he's been able to get to his spots and rise up over guys at 6'8". Um, Honestly, too, like, and I want to pass it off to you so you can highlight a Wolf, but I do want to say, like, some of his growth kind of reminded me, like, I saw Jaden McDaniels get to a spot in some certain spots, and it kind of reminded me of what Dre has looked like in the mid range. But from your perspective, which Wolves really stood out for you in last night's matchup?
I just got to ride with Naz Reid because he's been on an absolute tear as a 3-point shooter. He had some in the it was like second he subbed in the game, he hit 3 threes in a row. He is, let me see if I can pull up the stats on him, but he is boosted his 3-point percentage back up to over 40% to where start of the year it looked like last year was looking a bit like an outlier. He was 41.4% last season. He was hovering like 35 to start the year, and I mean, there's a lot more gravity there too, because he was kind of like quote unquote the cat replacement. You wanted him to pick up that usage,
Right.
bring the 3-point percentage. Like, you wanted him to take a lot more of the reins there. So it's kind of stood out a lot more. But like over his, let's go last 10. Nas is going to be shooting a big 60% from 3 over his last 10 games on 5.6 attempts per game.
Yeah.
He's just on a heater. And it's the deceptiveness of the jump shots with his mechanics, which is so fun because it seems like something that teams could maybe want to fix just by looking at it. But I feel like it works out really well for him. His range is underrated. He feasts above the break too. Like, those games where he just can't miss from 3 are so impactful for the team.
He has such a unique like you said, shot mechanic. Like kind of, it's almost like he never really jumps, and so he could almost fire at any moment. So I thought like the Hawks would kind of close out lax at times, but he could shoot it without really being into like really bending his knees, whatever it may be. And I've always loved him as a player, like ever since I saw him in Jelly Fam, like, and I love the skill. And so I thought um, I was pretty high on like the overall uh like the trade because I thought that in some ways that Randall would bring some things that Cat didn't bring, and then maybe you can lean into Nas a little bit more as that spacer and as that second big and to his credit offensively, I think he's been there. Like you said, over his last 10, he's at 60% from three, but he's averaging 17 points on 10 shot attempts. And that's on like 74 true shooting percentage. Like you can't ask for better offensive output from your second big. Um, I think from my perspective, I think Rudy Gobert was really good last night. Um, and I'm sure you're familiar, but like a lot of times what Rudy does will never really pop up on the stat sheet. But he drew 6 fouls, had 18 and 10. He controlled the glass when he was in the game, and there were multiple moments where I felt like the Hawks completely just did not think about shooting when he was at the rim. It started off the game like Zachary Rezache went right at him, and I was like, okay, that was a little audacious from him, but
He
obviously
had
he
a
didn't.
transition lay that he tried to do later too
Yeah,
that it
he
wasn't
tried
even
to attack
close.
Gobert multiple times, and Gobert, to his credit, even as he's aged, and I think there is some loss of athleticism, some verticality from him, and I think I think that's impacted his finishing more than anything. But the rim protection has always been, it probably will remain to be elite. So I thought he did a pretty stand-up job against the Hawks, who do have even without Trae Young, who gets them those looks in the paint. This is a team that has a lot more size. This is a team that wants to attack the rim. This is a team that's third in point paints per game. And so for the Timberwolves to hold them to 38 was pretty impressive. And to Rudy Gobert's credit, I mean, he still has a pretty big differential on terms of like percentages at the rim. So, I mean, guys are shooting almost 9 percentage points worse when he contests it. And I think that in some ways too, I was curious about like the long term or like because the bet for me is like, okay, well, Gobert is only at this point, he's kind of like on the other side of the mountain, unfortunately. Um, but if he can maintain a little bit of this value where he can still, take a lot of space, just be a body in the paint, then I think you can sort of like sunset him into like a more, a bench role as he gets older, and he can come in and give you 20 minutes and dominate on the glass and protect the rim. And I think it's pretty funny because that's kind of like what we're doing with Clint. We're like, Clint is still a great offensive rebounder. He's still sometimes a great interior presence, but we're trying to sort of transition away from him. So I'm curious if you think there's a similar sort of path for Rudy, and then just overall your thoughts on his performance.
Yeah, he's been tricky this year because it's varied a bit with the Randall addition because so much of why he was comfortable last year is him and Cat had the chemistry. Like a lot of it reminds me of year one of Gobert trying to adjust next to Cat, where he just wasn't comfortable with the low man help. His drop positioning was kind of wavering. It would affect his rebounding, it would affect his contesting, it would affect like his block numbers were down, which doesn't really mean a ton for him, but it's a lot of just the comfortability in the drop. And it's been wavering a bit this year. There's been also like weird defensive rebound issues, but I think when you put him up against players like Okongwu, Capella, I mean, Okongwu took a couple of threes. I don't know how I feel about the 3-point jumper. Honestly, it's something, but like when you face him up against these bigs, these traditional inside like rim finishing, play finishing bigs, that's where Rudy's going to shine his best because he could be as like mad comfortable. He can roam all over the place, be the rim deterrent. So this was for sure one of his better games, and it seems like every time. One thing I really give him is every time he faces scrutiny from either Finch or general media stuff, like over a couple game stint, he usually always backs it up like right away. He really just had a good attention to detail over these last couple games because Finch called out his defensive rebounding issues a while back, and I want to say 2-3 games back, and he's been. It just seems like there's a lot more attention to detail there, and it's hard to tell what they're going to do with him moving forward because still so much of it is the offensive worry for me. Like even with last year's roster, Rudy's offense is going to be such a black, like it's such a black hole for your team when you get that far into the playoffs. Like, it's so easy. Like, he can make short roll reads, but you don't want that to happen, especially with the way teams are blitzing Ant. Like, it's hard to find that seam where it's comfortable, but you also still want to use it. So honestly, it's just keeping an eye on the offense for me, majorly into the future. I just think the defense is going to be there enough. He's just so large and he plays so hard. So
Yeah, it's interesting about the offense too, because I feel like his hands are way worse than you would think, especially for like the
oh my
lobs that
god,
he should do.
it's
He has really bad hands, and it's kind of made me think too, like when I think about like draft prospects or guys that like maybe hands don't get better because it's like his if he could just catch the ball a little bit, if he had a little bit more control when he went up, or if he had more burst off the ground, then I think he would be someone that you could really trust in the playoffs. Is like, but I mean, you saw teams like Dallas or teams like they were willing to try and wrap him up because he couldn't finish through contact. They were willing to put him on the free throw line. They were willing to make him force him to make decisions off the short roll. And so I do think it's something that's been in the back of my head watching him in the playoffs because I see the defensive value. And it's never been about like him guarding in space because I think for the most part, he's done a good job guarding in space even as he's gotten older. It's about the offensive drop off. And if he is providing enough defensive, which at his peak, I think he was. So it's definitely something I'm trying to keep in mind as I think about like, okay, if the Hawks want to go and get like a drop big, like make sure their hands are soft, make sure they can finish consistently at the rim because I think it is a
especially
detriment.
building around Trey. Like,
Yeah, you have to have a guy who can maximize that for sure. Um, I guess from your perspective too, like what Hawk stood out for you besides DeAndre Hunter?
I like to see just Ricochet get a little bit more of extended leash.
Mhm.
Get to see him just he didn't have a like perfect game. He didn't have a great game, but it was just good to see somewhere the tools were. And get more of an like my league wide NBA watching's just been down a little bit this year because I've been busy. But like it was good to kind of get a check in on him to see where he's at just relative to the prospect status. Like there's
I
so
think
much
that's what it is.
dialogue around him compared to it's just the number one pick stuff. Like
Yeah.
he's gonna draw so much more attention, so much more scrutiny, irregardless of that. So I thought it was really interesting to see just where he's at. And I don't want to like talk about him for very long, but Garrison Matthews just had some like he had one make this game that was just absurd in transition. It was like Curry level shot making on one shot. I don't he did the same thing in Atlanta against the Wolves too, where he just took over. Like I don't know. I just like seeing all the options this Hawks roster has. I know you've put out a couple of things about it, how it's just like feels like a minor league system in a way with how Keaton, I mean, Vic Krejci is more borderline than other guys, but Barlow, like all these guys are very much getting prepared to potentially be future role players or even to step in for stuff like this. I just think that whole kind of perspective it's super interesting with how overloaded rosters are getting and how much talent there is in the league to see how these just fringe players can still impact the game. Like some of these guys, Keaton missed a lot of threes, but I mean he could very well turn into like a third guard, backup
Yeah.
guard,
Mhm.
like for any like cheap contracts, especially with the CBA, how it is right now. Like
Mhm.
finding these guys that know your system, your cheap contracts. So that's why I thought it was just super interesting to see kind of the extended run of a lot of the other fringe players.
Yeah, a lot of good points that I want to talk about. And I think first off about Ricochet, I definitely agree. I wish he got more run and just in general. Like last night, I do think maybe it was injury related, but he's played 40 games this season and he only has 5 games above 30 minutes. And he hasn't played above 30 minutes since I think the game against I think it was the Boston game. And that was on November 4th. And I do think part of this is about okay, how good DeAndre Hunter has been, and that at the same time, Ricochet's shooting hasn't been there, and so it's hard to justify giving him a longer leash. But I do think the more that he's allowed to play through some of this, and that's where the Hawks I think are trying to thread the needle, where it's like okay, this isn't necessarily a developmental year, but it is necessary for these guys to get reps. It is necessary for Ricochet to see minutes on the NBA court. And if this was injury related, then I understand him not playing 20 minutes. But if it wasn't and he's fully healthy, there was no reason for him to not play 30, you know? And yes, the shot wasn't falling, and honestly, he's also someone that I feel like I'm learning lessons from prospect evaluation because he was incredibly streaky as a shooter. Yes, he shot 40%, but there were games where he was off. And I think also the other thing is he was really bad above the break overseas, and he's continued that trend in the NBA where he's a really great corner 3-point shooter, but above the break, it's very much hit or miss, and he's one of the worst in the league from that spot.
It's so hard to translate like league to league stuff too with that as well, with distances.
Yeah,
And yeah, I've been on that same track with a lot of things about just trying to keep an eye on prospect stuff. But I mean, I guess the best thing is moving forward, you just kind of notice those things more. It's more things to put in your notebook. It's just gonna take time with some of those things. Like it is. I do see you're coming from with the same angle with I mean, I could say a lot. I'll probably say a lot of things about Rob later, but it's much more fun when I guess you got the inside eye on it with your favorite team. Obviously, a
yeah,
team you're watching all 82 of, like you are gonna pick up on so many more trends than if you weren't.
yeah. And
If
I
you're only watching
still
like 20 games.
I still really, really believe in Riche's because he's been, I mean, there's no other way to put it. He's been bad as an offensive player. He's been bad, but he's still been an impact player because of the defense, because of the rebounding, because of the cutting, the spatial awareness. And so it's like, I think his floor is a lot higher than I thought it could have been. And then maybe his ceiling isn't as high as it may have been touted at the draft. Like I definitely thought that him being pushed as a number one pick was a little bit over the top. But I'm encouraged by his aggressiveness, his tenacity. He takes some audacious shots where it's like, okay, did you really need to take that? Was that a great shot? But it's like I like the lack of conscience at times. It's not something that I always want to see, but I do like the sort of wherewithal to attack Gobert or to like go at the rim in transition. And I think as he learns
There's
and
more
gets stronger,
confidence than just
yeah,
being doing dumb shit. Like
but sometimes it is reckless. Like sometimes it is reckless, and that's why he doesn't shoot as well at the rim. So he needs to learn how to pick and choose his spots. And then your point about the system, I think that's somewhere the Hawks are above like they're ahead of the curve. Like I think Memphis and OKC, Miami, they've been doing this for years, but I think Atlanta they've really created a pipeline. Like Lee Krejci is one, and I don't know you remember him. He played for Minnesota, and he showed signs there as well. But he's become legitimately like a very strong role player, someone who will keep the ball moving, someone who could step in as a second guard, someone who could shoot the ball well off ball, someone who knows the system, someone who embraces being a Hawk, and that's because of his time in the G League. And I think they've been very intentional with that, with the way that Quinn Snyder is having them run the same type of offense. They're getting guys in similar situations, so when they come up to the big leagues, they're ready. And I think that's been a differentiator for us because we have guys who are unfortunately injury prone, and maybe that's like Bogdan Bogdanovic didn't play for personal reasons. He's been in and out the lineup. DeAndre Hunter has been in and out. Jalen Johnson. So like it gives us a bit of a floor to where we can be competitive in these games. And when we take a look at the film, like I do think the Hawks in general did not. I wouldn't even say they played I don't think either team played great, if I'm going to be honest. But the Hawks at the very least were able to make it interesting because of what the investment they have in their overall system. But I wanted to ask you too, like, and I tweeted this. I'm like, man, Ant is so exciting. He's so electric, and it feels like the Wolves' offense could be so anemic. And when I looked at the trends, you guys have the lowest transition frequency of any team, which I found really, really, really intriguing. And you guys averaged 14 fast break points. Hawks held you guys to 6, which is kind of crazy because the Hawks had 21 turnovers. So talk to me a little bit while I pull up these clips about like the fast break attack, like transition in general, and like why do you think that's such a low frequency for you guys?
I've written about it like multiple times over the last 3 years. It's just weird because there's clear lineups where it works,
Mm-hmm.
especially with so much of it just ties back to the offensive flow idea and the weird battle that they have between structure and freelance. A lot of it you can point to the directions of roster construction, like having Rudy on your team isn't going to be perfect because he's not going to like grab and go, and he's a little slower to like hit. He's not going to hit outlet passes. He's going to be a little slower to kind of get the ball out. But there's just been a lot of weird concerns with Ant in general this year on his transition stuff. He loves to favor dribble pull up threes, which I think is why his points possession is a lot higher than it really seems. But he's had a lot of just like really missed easy lays in transition this year. Minot had one this game where
Oh
he
yeah.
he should have dunked it, honestly. Like he smoked a pretty wide open lay. And it's in a weird position where, like, look at Memphis, they got their transition attack going, and yes, they turned the ball over within it a lot, but I feel like it's a net positive for them, where it really helps their overall identity. And it's just really confusing with this team because they are not good in the half court offense. They need to find better ways to get quick points, but they just kind of seem to refuse to try to get to those. And like, even Jaden's a really good transition option too. Like, there's young athletes that can get out and run. So
yeah, it's I think that's something that the Hawks are trying to figure out too, because you do have, and then they've committed, like, for example, I think, and it's tough because you have Ant and you have Randall, who are two great shot creators for themselves. And I think there's like almost an incentive, like, okay, well, Ant can slow this down and he can get to his spot, or Randall can slow this down and he can get to the post. And for the Hawks, like, we have a sort of like reverse, like, sort of ideology around that, because we don't have those shot creators. So it's like we need to get out and run as much as possible. So I do wonder if that's somewhat a part of it. I think your point about Rudy Gobert being the big definitely is a part of it as well. But what I found interesting is, like, the Hawks, for example, on all their steals, and they had, let me see, they had, I think 10 steals. You guys had 13. The Hawks were able to, they got in transition on all 10 of those steals. Minnesota got out in transition on 77%. So that's why the Hawks were plus 13, is because they're pushing it every time they got a steal. The Wolves sometimes slow played, or maybe it might be a foul, whatever it may be. But I thought it was an interesting contrasting style, and I think sometimes, like, I would like to see Ant be more aggressive. Like, here he's the Hawks don't have a big in the paint, and he tries to shuttle this to Randall, and like, I'd like to see him draw defense a little bit more, stuff like that. And I think his decision making, I think at some point, I think the reason why you transition from Cat, of course, is because Ant's the franchise guy, and I think that's a justifiable decision. And it's also, I think, financially related, but I think ultimately the hope is that Ant becomes that franchise guy. And it's only by him getting these reps of, like, having to operate as the guy creating offense, is that he's going to get to that level. But I think it's kind of weird to me that, as such a gifted athlete, it's not natural for him to want to get out and transition at times. And to your point too, like, I think he's first in 3-pointers made, and the Wolves are like fourth or like, y'all are top 5 in pull up threes. And so it's not to say there isn't value in that, but it's like that's been the conversation around. This is the missed layup from mine. I do want to play this. But like it's been a conversation around you guys all season, like, where Ant's trying to find that blend of, like, attacking the rim and pulling up for 3. And I think in the half court, him pulling up from 3 is necessary because of the spacing. But to your point, in transition, he needs to find that a little bit more. Do you think he was getting to the rim more in transition last season?
I mean, the rim, it's a big conversation with him this season, is just his overall rim percentage being down to, like, its tied lowest, I believe, what it was 4 years ago. And he's just too good of an athlete to have that, and too good of like, his finishing talent is there. Like, that's the biggest question mark, is just trying to find what the reason is. Obviously, you can point to the spacing issues. And Jaden's shooting like mid 20% from the corner on 3. So teams aren't respecting that. They're collapsing in on him. So in the half court, it all makes sense. But a lot of the transitional stuff, it does feel decision related. Like, he had one that went crazy viral the other, like, week that I posted, where he had Ja and he did a Euro and literally just threw it to the other team for no reason, because he had no idea what he wanted to do. And I mean, a lot of people say, like, just go dunk it. Like, it just doesn't work like that. He just doesn't really have that nuance in transition right now that was really heralded out of Georgia, which is, it's very confusing with him. And I think it just really comes down to the right lineups regarding the Wolves' transitional attack right now. Like, I think Rob has done a really good job to start off his career of just, even if it's as simple as throw aheads or leaking out, like, things like that are, when you see someone else do it that hasn't played a ton, it's so much easier to see how it doesn't happen very frequently. And it's just the turnover issues within it. Nikhil becomes really turnover prone there. Dante does when he's healthy, but it really just comes down to that guard room. And Conley's not going to do a ton transition either. I'd like to see them try more. I'll put it at that. Like,
yeah, that makes sense. There were multiple scoring droughts in this game. You guys went almost 5 minutes without a field goal in the fourth quarter, and that was the exact same time where the Hawks were missing open threes. And both teams had a below 100 offensive rating, which is in today's NBA is hilarious. And you would typically see that when like both teams are playing great defense. And I do think from your guys' perspective, it was the Hawks. The Hawks in general don't have a ton of shooters, but when it's Mohamed Gay taking, I think he might have took 6 or maybe even more than that.
yeah, there are
He was
some
eating 'em
bad
up.
misses.
Yeah, like he took 6. He went 0 for 6. Reza Shea went 2 for 6. Keaton Wallace took 9. And then so our best shooters, Garrison Matthews took 4, and then DeAndre Hunter took 8. So I think the funneling, the shuttling, the shooters was good from you guys' perspective. But in general, it didn't feel like a very connected defensive game from either team. And so from Hawks fans' perspective, it's kind of like it's hard for, at least for me, it's hard for me to judge like, was this a decent defensive performance, or was it just like Minnesota wasn't engaged and shots weren't falling? Like where would you sort of gauge it from like the Hawks defensive perspective? And then I'll give you like what I think your guys' offense against our defense.
I mean, a lot of it is just a lot of trends with Wolves games where the first half, there's a lot of structure, and then they just kind of like that third quarter was just, it's those strings of turnovers in a row where teams can capitalize and get out and transition, like we said like earlier. It's a lot of just minimizing those mistakes, and it falls in the same idea of like, is it better defense or are you actually turning the ball over? But I feel stringing together things like that, it's always going to be really beneficial for a team like what the roster of this Hawks team put out in this game. Like if you can get free easy baskets like that, it's only going to make your chances better throughout the game. You can slip up a little more defensively later in the game. I think my biggest thing with the Hawks defense has to be the big man situation is just very fascinating to me. Clint looks, I went up and looked to see how old Clint was. I anticipated he was way over 30, which is crazy that he's only 30 years old. I guess it's just because he's been around forever. But he's just, I mean, a lot of his game was built around athleticism, obviously. And I like that they're kind of seeing what they got there with Okongwu and Clint at the same time. Like that's what you should be doing at this point, given Onyeka's in deeper into his contract and he's not getting paid a ton. Like it's not a big financial risk or anything, but it's just interesting to see kind of where this identity is going to be defensively, because so much of the Hawks defense, I mean, it's hard to predicate when Dyson Daniels doesn't play too, because that is what the Hawks defense is this year. He initiates the chaos, he initiates the deflections, the steals, everything. So I guess it's kind of hard to get a read from this perspective, but I think a lot of it just comes down to what the center position is going to be moving forward for the Hawks.
Yeah, and I think it's not really a question like who looks better offensively, at least in my opinion. Like, what I see from Onyeka on a per minute basis and what he does for the offense is like so hilariously more dynamic than what Clint does, that just from that alone is like what I find it hard to like justify playing Clint the amount of minutes that he did, or even starting him. But I do think this matchup in particular can be tough for someone like Onyeka, right? Like Gobert had some very strong defensive possessions against him, and it's interesting too because like I didn't remember what he looked like as a prospect. I didn't remember what Onyeka looked like as a rookie, but I saw a video of like Wemby as a kid, and I was like, his mannerisms and the way he moves, that's the same way he does now. And he was 5 years old in that video. So I wanted to see, like, it made me think about Onyeka and like how he sometimes can be somewhat blind in the post. Like he'll just turn and shoot and not be aware of the guys around him. And there were multiple instances in this game where I felt like he did that, and he can't particularly do that against length. just because he doesn't have the size to like finish through that. What I do think he does really, really like this is special from him, at least in my opinion. Like what he can do as a passer, especially in comparison against someone like Capella. I'm just gonna let this load a little bit. So I love that he sort of just doesn't just stand there statically with the ball in his hands, and that's what a lot of bigs do on every level, but in the NBA as well. And he's constantly looking for different ways to, like, okay, this handoff isn't going to go through. I'm going to reverse it this way, and he's paying attention here to Ant's body language. He's denying the handoff. He doesn't have his hand, and so when Dre goes back door, it's a perfectly placed pass. And this isn't something that Clint Capella can do. It isn't something that many centers can do. And I thought that him and DeAndre Hunter sort of complement each other in that sense because Dre is best as an off-ball scorer. So if Trey isn't on the floor, then Onyeka being able to do things like this helps the Hawks' best scorer get into their spots. And honestly, this is a really tough shot and a crazy contest from Jaden. Like I think Jaden, I think he's gotten a lot more hype as a defender, but going this vertical and like I don't even know how high his hand is, but he nearly gets this in a tough shot.
He's almost been better as a roamer than a point of attack defender like this year, Jaden.
And I think that's over him too. He has such long arms.
I think the big thing with this pass from Onyeka is just a bounce pass on the move for a big in traffic it's tough to find. I mean, given I hated Ant on this play because Ant was weird this game. It was he's kind of lackadaisical against like teams that aren't supposed to compete with his team. Yeah. It's super frustrating, but
definitely felt that.
I mean, even it's fun to see on like those blind pig actions they do for Trey, kind of those back doors. It opens up so much creativity, like especially bringing it back to prospect stuff. Like it is one thing if a guy is comfortable with the ball in his hands. It's another if you could be actually dynamic within that hub role, or because I mean you see it so much more college teams running that kind of way of usage for their bigs. And it's such a great way to just flip to the second side and try to create on other sides, and especially with a big that's not going to be spacing the floor, just kind of generating that space, giving them use. Yeah. It's something that I try to keep an eye on with Rudy too.
And it's interesting too because it's not like he's always perfect. Like he just had his career high in 7 assists, and like this is like I don't know if Ant gets a hand on this or if he just whiffs it. Kind of looks like Ant got a hand on it. So that's a good play from Ant. But I think especially against a team with that can have disengaged off-ball defenders, when you flip the ball, that's when you can really catch teams lacking. That's what that play looked like. That got that open layup, and this is just good attachment. I think Ant gets a hand on this, honestly. And Onyeka finished with 4 turnovers, so like it wasn't his best outing as a dribble handoff of, but I'll take that type of pass, because again, that might have been the one that led to an assist, but he had multiple passes getting guys open going downhill. I will take that. I won't take this, but I will take like him messing up on the pass. But this type of stuff can't happen. And this is just Mike Conley being smart. Like sometimes you play against vets that are going to catch you lacking. Like
he wasn't even smallest guy in the court. You don't want that happening.
You can't. And this is, I think, you have to be stronger with the ball. And then the fact that Mike gets this back and tips it. I mean, this is just, come on, like, like that's a super smart play for him. You can't let that happen. And then I think he finished. That was the second turnover, and I think he had 2 more. So here he's, again, he's operating out of the handoff, switches the ball, switches the side of the floor, and then he steps kind of back. Hopefully this loads. Let's see. I do like that he tried to dive to the rim here, like knowing that Mike is on him. Like you might as well take advantage of your size. I thought this was out the cylinder. I don't know though. It kind of looked like it was out the cylinder. I also didn't know this.
It was on his way.
It was definitely on his way. If he waited just a little bit longer, maybe this is 2 points. But this is smart awareness from him. Like, okay, like I got a small on me. Let me not stand out here idly at the 3-point line. Let me go be a big man. And so I like that he attacked the glass here. So even his mistakes, like these are all miscues. These are all like bad passes, stuff like this. Like I'll live with this all day if that means that he can bring that upside as a dribble handoff hub. And so I guess like from the Wolves perspective, is this the type of big that like, do you want a big who can function like this way? Or do you think that like a more of a floor spacing type guy is where you'd like to see them keep exploring.
I mean, this year especially has really changed my perspective with how Ant is like one of the most blitzed players in the league right now. I'm sure so much of that is because Rudy is the big and the short roll option. It's just he's been a ridiculous pull-up three-point shooting threat. If you can hold up his driving lanes, hold up his three-point shooting, and make other people become decision makers, it's a really big way to just stumble up the offense. So I think that's really where there was some noise around like Kyle Anderson's missed, and as dreadful as he was at times last year, Kyle Anderson in the middle of the zone as a short roll guy, free throw line and extended, anywhere around there, like passing inside out, that's where he really thrived. So I think it's just finding because I think the Wolves should be in another market for another big, because it's just Randall, Rudy, Nas right now. Like if they get an injury, it's gonna be Garza, and that's an experience. But yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. It's just weird with this big man group too, with the draft too. Like the Wolves might get that Pistons pick conveyed, and still it's so much confusion of trying to figure out what those big men are. And it's a position you want to develop long term. It's hard to just plug and play a guy from free agency, pick him up from another team. Ant has had his own struggles with trying to work with a big in the short roll. So even just having the trust to feed Rudy is really the big thing with Ant for a long time. I mean, they had to literally bring Mike Conley in just so they could find someone with chemistry, because him and D'Lo were like nowhere on the same page, did not like each other. So I guess that's kind of, it opens up a lot more offensive creativity too. That's the really big thing of it, is like, look at Hartenstein with the Knicks last year, this year with the Thunder. Like, if you can, it's a very easy example to make, but finding just a skilled on-ball big it's another thing I look for in prospects too, is just like comfortability on the ball. Is such a big thing. Doesn't even have to be crazy decision making. Just if you can hand the ball off effectively, if you can make reads, simple stuff like that.
I think to your point too about offensive creativity, that is something that I've put a huge premium on for the Hawks, for teams in general. What's really stood out to me from you guys in particular, but this is very similar to the Hawks. The Hawks were god awful in the clutch last season. Like we had a 6 worst record. Like our offense is awful. This year we have the fourth most wins, and we have the 4th best winning percentage. Last season, I believe you guys were better in the clutch than you were this season. Yes,
this year's been crazy.
58% winning percentile.
It's like every game is a clutch game this year.
This year, you guys have the most clutch games played in the league at 29, and you have a 44.8 win percentage, which is 22nd in terms of effectiveness, in terms of performance in the clutch. So I think, and this is kind of like, it's all ties into Onyeka, and it all ties into like having a different way to generate offense, because Randall and Ant, again, very gifted shot creators, but too often it feels like the ball is sticking for Minnesota, or it feels like they're not getting into multiple different types of actions. And to your point, it can fluctuate from quarter to quarter. But for the Hawks, like we still have like a very much of a drive and kick offense. Like you can see how little the Minnesota respects the spacing. Like literally nobody is within the 3-point line, right? And this is with Riza with 2 feet in the paint. And as the ball ping pongs, you see Rudy again is not really giving Onyeka any sort of respect. And his shot, like I think he has great touch around the rim. I don't know if this will ever be able to be like something he can take 4 or 5 a game, which I think is what's going to have to provide spacing. Like he's only taking 2 right now, and that's not doing much for our spacing. But the fact that he can take that space, go into a handoff. He can run Chicago action. He can run grenade. He can run pistol, whatever it may be. Like he can be that facilitator from the top of the key. It's unlocked a lot for us, and it's why he's closed so many games. And it's also why like we could also lean on our defense in these moments too, which is what we didn't have in seasons past. So and we'll take a look after you, while you answer this, about like some of the structured stuff that you've liked from Minnesota and what you've seen from what they do, like with their stagger actions, whatever it may be. But I've tied a lot of our struggles in the clutch to a lack of versatility, and so I'm curious if you see that same pattern with Minnesota.
Yeah, a lot of it's just the decision making, the feel of the team. A lot of it just feels like like ant or die. Like we've seen multiple possessions. There was the recent game where he took just a wild fadeaway through that was like nowhere close at the buzzer with 6 seconds. Like they just seem to not have much trust in others and kind of need the table setter and Conley there, but also he's not good enough. The clutch lineups have just been a big topic of discussion for the whole season. Having Rudy on the team already brings in that, because Finch really likes using him in clutch situations when he shouldn't be out there. It's really weird. They'll be like 10 seconds on the clock, you got the ball, you're down 2, and he has Rudy on the court. I don't understand why. It's like you have Naz Reid, you got these spacing options. Like, why is he just there to screen and they're just going to double off him?
Did the same exact thing. I don't mean to interrupt you. We did the same exact thing. We were down
So
3,
frustrating.
and Onyeka was on the court. And the first time we ran the play, no one got open but Onyeka. They called a timeout. Onyeka was still on the floor for the second time, and then again, he was the one who shot the 3. So I get that frustration 100%. I get it.
There's been, well, yeah, it's, and then like Conley needs to be out there on the court to kind of orchestrate stuff, be there as a kind of like a decision making outlet for Ante. Let's say he goes right, they put 2 on the ball, like he has that outlet he can throw to his left, and then Conley can kind of go like second side or get the ball back to him. Like it, but Conley doesn't bring, I think Conley, last time I checked, he was 0 for 9 in clutch situations on the season from the field, and like 0 for 7 from 3, something ridiculous. And it's just the trusted shot makers. Like, is Randall going to make a quick decision, or is Jaden going to knock down it? Like, is Jaden reliable enough as a shooter? Like, when you need a bucket, it's just tough because they're going to sell out an Ant as far as they can.
Yeah.
So I think that's why like the clutch struggles really have popped up. It's just it just sucks it's happened so many times, because over half the games in clutch time is crazy.
Yeah, the Hawks lean a little bit too much into Trey ball at the end of quarters too, and the end of games, and he has never really been, his isolation effectiveness is going to be heavily predicated on like how well he's shooting, just because of how tough it can be for him to get to the rim. And when teams collapse on him and we don't have the shooting around him to open up those lanes, or the shooting to knock down the shots, it can be tough for the Hawks to get those buckets when they need it. And it's been weird because we'll see, like I've seen great ATOs from Quinn out of like in regular portions of the game, but so often he's resorting to these just very static alignments at the end of the games. I mean, you even saw it like against you guys. Like we were down 8, or maybe it was 6 points at that point before we fouled. And DeAndre Hunter, the best player on the floor, takes the ball out. We're assuming it's going to be some sort of action for him to pass it and then run off a screen and come back and get it. He passes the ball in and stands there. And it's like, bro, and maybe that's too, like, I think a mindset type thing that can be tough for guys when they have to scale up in their role. Like, he's never been the guy that ended, like, you might be the guy in the corner standing there and okay, we're going to get you this shot. But for you to go and create it, maybe just for a second, he's like, oh, wait, I'm supposed to have the ball. And I think that's what kind of happened. It ended up being a turnover. So I don't know if I can really assign all that to Quinn. But I do think in every other situation where Trey is on the floor, there's no reason for us to be clearing the floor out and just saying work unless he has it going that night. And too often it's been like he doesn't have it going, and we don't have any sort of movement going on in another place. And I think that's my biggest criticism of him. And then I guess the other big criticism would be like the size that they put around Trey. Like we have, I mean, also like last night we're calling up guys like Barlow and Muhammad Gay, who haven't played many NBA minutes at all for us this season, but the size of those lineups was dramatically different than what like Hawks fans are really used to. Like I think at some point, like there was a Dominic Barlow missed layup, but the way he attacked the rim, like we have very few guys like in the regular rotation who would be able to even get there from that position. And that's just like a sheer function of their size and their lack of athleticism. Like David Roddy, who was a Minnesota native, I'm pretty sure, or a Minneapolis native, he may be the worst player in the NBA. And we play him consistent minutes. And I don't know why, but like I think it's either this player or the one following. But I'll definitely let it run once it loads. But he basically streaks down the floor from the 3-point line and he gets all the way to the rim. and then it opens up a lane for Capella to get the putback. And I think that's just the power of having size. And the Hawks are certainly bigger than they used to be in certain years. Like at 2023, 2022, 2023, we're the lightest team and we were the shortest, or like one of the 5 shortest. And that can't work when you have Trae Young. The entire team can't be small. Like that's a recipe for disaster. And so I think, they've sort of tried to, supplement the lack of size in recent seasons, and you're seeing some growth towards that. I think Ricochet was a function of that. I think trading for Dyson was a function for that. But on a consistent lineup basis, it doesn't feel like he's putting out lineups that are best suited to sort of insulate the lack of size across the roster, whether it's at the center position or whether it's at the point guard position. So I think that some of these guys also just aren't really like consistent NBA players yet. Like Dominic Barlow, I remember when I was speaking with Brad Rowland, Locked On Hawks, he said that Barlow was widely expected by the rest of the league to be on a standard contract. And that's because of his size, like what he showed in Flash in San Antonio. And so people were really shocked that he got on a 2-way contract, and then we don't really utilize him. So it's like, if we have a 6'10" guy, yes, he's developing. I'd rather that 6'10" guy be out there than 6'6", 300-pound David Roddy, because he's not doing us any favor at power forward. Like he's helping with he's not doing anything except helping the other team. And so like this is an example. Like if this is David Roddy, this is not happening. And again, he smokes his layup. It's not a spectacular move by any like a stretch of the imagination, but simply by his size, like he draws to there. If it's David Roddy, that he's pulling that out. And so I think like that's where my frustration from this season comes, because like we want to be able to make sure that we're giving guys opportunity, and like there's no reason for David Roddy to be paying. I don't even remember how many minutes he played, but like there's no reason for him to be averaging. I'm pretty sure for the season he's averaging 13 minutes, but over the last 5, like he's averaging 14, and like there's no reason for him to get consistent burn if you're trying to win. So
I've never been a big Roddy guy. Even when he was a prospect, he was difficult as a prospect because he had great underlying numbers, but it's like a 6'4" power forward. It's I'm not a big fan.
It was always going to be rough for him because, like, small ball centers, especially at his height, like there wasn't really a path to NBA success for him. But that's enough for my my Roddy rant. Like I feel like I got to get one in every time. Every time he plays, I have to complain about him. I'm trying to load up the clips that you sent. So let me go ahead and share the screen for that. I definitely wanted to talk through some of the schematic stuff you noticed. You talked about this stagger. So talk me through these stagger actions and what you liked about what you saw here.
It's been, Nas is usually always the target on these, and like Nikhil is always going to be in the role of kind of like a decoy. They did it with Dante a lot to start the year, especially when he was just naturally getting a lot of flow off staggers in general, so it could kind of draw more attention, and he kind of like leaked behind on a flare. It's been a really big like ATO play for them this year. Finch ran it 4 straight plays, I think, early in the 4 straight times to open fourth quarters to start like between like 5th and 10th game of the year around there. I couldn't believe he kept doing it, but it's been really effective. But I just really like these angles to see where structure can get you if you make the right reads. If you make like the first one is going to be top, like Garrison takes over the top, so Nas just cuts. I don't think Nas was really expecting the ball here, honestly. Like he's not cutting hard, but it's just a great pass by Rob to find him there. Right over like the shoulder of Keaton. And then the second one is also super interesting to see because I didn't have the audio on, but you could hear Roddy actually shouting and pointing out like to get Zach to stay up top there. Completely take it away again. They just flow straight into double drag for Rob. Like there's just a lot of functionality around it with those, using those 2 bigs dynamically to initiate offense. I'm always here for Rudy screen away from the ball because it gives him a role. It gives the team a little more space to operate. But it's been one of my favorite little staggers with Nas being the target. It's been one of my favorite kind of sets that they run this season, and we haven't really seen like this many dynamic options off it. Usually it's always just get the ball to Nas. So
No, I like the wrinkles, and it's so like you said, there's so many different ways you can play out of this. Like running a big off a stagger screen is ridiculous anyway at 6'10", but the fact that he can turn that shooting gravity into screening or rolling, I think gives you guys a
Sometimes
lot
he
of
even
options.
curls it too and has got some like downhill attacks off it too. Like the fact that he can curl that and be an option downhill with some momentum is just nuts. But I really like that it's clearly targeted to play to Nas's strength as a shooter and just off the dribble. Like he can take a couple dribbles, drive there, and have a dynamic option down. Like you can either hit the Nikhil in the corner there, or there's just so much more functionality with it than um, what it really just appears initially, which I really like.
Yeah, and this is a great read from Rob too. Very confident, steps into it. Um, I think I've always thought he jumps so high in his jumper, which I think is really funny because he's a small guy, but he gets like a beautiful shot, no contest for real, and then he knocks it down. So where have you been on Rob's rookie season? I know it's been sort of up and down in terms of playing time and opportunity, but what have you liked from him? What have you not liked? And what did you like from this game in particular?
The big thing with this game was just how different. I mean, it's really how it's been with a lot of games. Is when he comes in, the ball's just a lot more dynamic. It moves around more frequently. He's very ball dominant. Like he will hold the ball for 16 seconds of a possession, but a lot of it is him getting a screen, kicking it out to the popper, running back around them, curling around, going to something else. He's always moving. He uses his quickness and kind of energetic nature for a lot of good things with this offense. It's such a different change of pace from Conley or even Ant on the ball, to where I can live with the rookie mistakes of like making bad passes in tight windows, things like that. Like he had a really poor turnover percentage last time I checked, um, up there with like all the high usage stars. But it's a lot of just the way the offense feels when he subs onto the court, and they're finding a lot better ways to insulate him with Rudy, making sure Rudy's on the court with him in these lineups. Defensively, it's going to be a work in progress. They're going to have to. It's just the obvious, but I think the offensive bonuses, he's been shooting pretty well from the field too. That's obviously a big thing, but so much of it is the playmaking for me. The way he moves the ball, the way the ball moves through others when he's on the court, the way he has an idea of where his big man is at all times, where it's almost like a blind kind of jump kick out. It's very impactful to a lot of the lineups and just kind of having a change of pace.
Yeah, he's taken 8 threes per 100 possessions and is shooting 48%. Obviously he hasn't played a ton of minutes, but from what I've seen, at least I was excited and I'm happy to see him like get some burn. I was high on him pre-draft. I thought he was like the type of creativity that this offense needed, and hopefully there was enough defense there to insulate him. And like, what do you think it's been like defensively? Because I know there are guys who just look small, and I don't know what it is about Rob, but he just looks tiny out there. Like he looks really really small. And this was a Hawks team that had a lot of big guys, and of course you guys have a lot of length too. But I liked what he did on. I think it was a defensive rebound. He competed for it. Stopped it. It was maybe it was a turnover or a rebound, but he was able to completely stop the transition attempt because he was able to get scrappy and knock it out of bounds. And I think he can be somewhat of a pest if he commits to it. So what does the defense look like? What do you think you guys are doing to insulate him, and how does it make you feel like long term about having him like next to Ant or next to like a Nas or even Rudy?
Like he's a listed 6'1", Conley's listed 6 foot. It is insane how different they look in stature. Like Rob he's so much more wiry than Conley. It's insane.
Yep.
But I really think that it's been as frustrating as it was to not see him get as much opportunity. I think it's really just wired into his brain how much he needs to compete on defense, how much he needs to try to do the extra things. Like he had a great contested rebound against Peyton Watson in the Denver game. It's just like those little things you love to see where hustling for loose rebounds. There's been a little bit of concern where Rudy's been too deep in drop and it's given up some easy, like he gets hunted. He for sure gets hunted. But I feel like there's just there's gonna be better ways to learn where Rudy just needs to step up a little bit more, where others need to kind of help him out defensively. But I do buy, like, I don't think he's gonna be a great screen navigator, but I do buy his quickness being able at least to give him a little bit of recovery help. Of even if he has to take a longer route around the screen, he can try to get a rear view contest, try to get back in the play. Because there's clear effort and clear athletic gifts there for him to work with. It's just gonna be something he has to work through. It's gonna be tricky, but there's a lot of good insulated other team defenders on the team. So where it's not as big of a red flag as it would have been on a lot of other teams he could have been drafted to.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Dang, I had a oh yeah, so I saw the interview he had with Ant, and he was saying like the biggest thing he learned from Ant was to keep shooting or something. Like, I can't remember the exact quote, but it made me laugh so hard because Ant was like beaming. He was like, yes, like he has that same scoring drive. So I guess like when you hear things like that, when I think a lot of these guys like there's a benefit to playing free. I feel like I truly believe that, where it's like, let this guy be special, let him create, let him improvise. And I thought that's how I sort of took it. It's like, okay, well, I'm gonna do what I can to stay on the floor, but like you need to let Ant be Ant sometimes. You need to let Rob be Rob. But when you hear like Ant being a big influence on guys, and just like some of the comments he's also made about like being doubled, or not wanting to pass as much, how does that make you feel? I'm just curious from your perspective, because it made me laugh. I don't know if that's like a damn, why would he say that type thing from y'all.
It's concerning at times because it's like a little too authentic, but it's just who Ant is, honestly. Like, I don't know. I like the authenticity of it. I like they're just saying the quiet parts out loud. That's really all it is. Like, these players, they're self-aware too. They know what's going on. But I feel like in terms with Rob, I'm not worried about that stuff with him one bit. He's been under a gigantic spotlight for the last like 4 years of his life. This is probably the smallest spotlight he's had on him in that time, honestly. Like, so I'm not too worried about it. It's just it's something to keep an eye on with their dynamic. But clearly they are I mean, Ant's always cheering him on the bench, like over enthusiastic, doing nonsense over there, and Rob scores. So that's always fun to see too. We haven't seen like too much on court chemistry for them because a lot of the time Rob comes on when Ant is off, but it's just great to see where it could go, honestly. Especially where Conley's at right now.
like I said too, I was very tapped in with Rob, and like I was tracking a lot of like
Kentucky team was fun.
Yeah, I love that, the Kentucky team. But even just like his starts this season, like, and I saw a lot of Wolves guys, you included, like pushing for him to get more run, especially when Conley was out, or like like giving him more burn. And do you think like some of the, I guess the unwillingness to play him, you think he's just like he hasn't earned the trust of Finch? Do you think it's ultimately tied back to the defense? Like, what do you think it will take for him to take that role on? Because I think you only have so much more time with Mike Conley, and Mike Conley is like a legend, a guy who like is a consummate point guard. And again, he was like, there was a reason you traded for him, but there is a ticking clock on him that I think guys his age who are in the league right now, like they have a longer runway just because of the way that they've been able to elevate and remain impactful. But like, what do you think it's going to take for Rob to be able to take that spot? Because I do think from the Hawks perspective, it's somewhat similar in terms of like, it took time for Onyeka to get it from Clint, but I don't think you guys have that time to wait. And I do think, it in my opinion, at least, it needs to be next season, or it needs to be, if not then, like mid-season of next season. But like, where do you stand at in terms of like, what does he have to do to get that role, and when do you think it needs to happen?
It's tricky because Conley's definitely bounced back later. He's hitting a lot more of his threes. He's been a little more efficient from the field. But his drop off from last year to this year has been just insane. Like, it's been a big part of why the team has struggled this year. I don't think people really realized how important Conley was to the success last year. Like, his pull up shooting just being just being solid all the time, consistency. But the thing with the Finch is he's just like Tibbs, like he does not like playing rookies whatsoever. It is crazy. And it took so long to kind of get this extended leash. Sucks that Dante had to get injured for this kind of to be created, but with where the team's at, hovering, they're 4 games over 500 now, but I mean they've been around 500 all season. I just think that this year was definitely kind of more of a retool year more than anything. I just think that it only makes sense to keep Rob as a focal point of the rotation moving forward for the last 35-ish games, because just the development, even if he's not playing his best ball, like he's going to have some poor stints here and there. As we get more of a sample size, he's only played like 250 minutes. I just think it's vital reps for him to get at this point, and it only makes sense to continue to play him in the rotation, even if it's smaller stints when Dante comes back, hopefully in like a month. But it's a lot of getting used to who you're playing around, getting used to playing with Ant, getting used to playing with Rudy. The NBA speed thing hasn't been a worry for me whatsoever, which is fantastic because he is such a quick player. But I mean, even quick players can get sped up, but I feel like he's matched that so well so far. So I feel like a lot of those rookie hurdles he's really gotten over. It's just coming down a lot to things that were worrisome as a prospect: rim pressure, his ability to operate inside the arc, just kind of finding his role overall, the defense. So I just think it's only going to be better with reps. Like you just kind of have to continue to find minutes for him down the stretch, and it's going to be tough for Finch because even last night's game, only played 30 minutes. Rob didn't even really get a second stint there, where he usually plays like that third quarter to fourth quarter sandwich there. Like his minutes were really impactful in that first stint, the first half. So I just think he doesn't need to like close games. He doesn't need to do anything dramatic. Like just try to continuously give him those 15 minutes a game to get reps is going to be really important.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing the similarities because I'm looking at Conley right now. He's at the highest point attempt rate of his career, but that's because he's at the lowest 2-point attempt rate of his career, and he's shooting 44%.
That's all he does.
Yeah, so like he's not shooting threes because he wants to; it's because he can't get to the rim anymore. And that's going to impact the playmaking. It's going to impact the way he's defending. It's going to impact the way everyone else is defending on the team. So I definitely hear that. And I think for Hawks fans, the path to Riza getting more, I almost sometimes wonder if he's been on a minutes restriction. That's how concrete his substitution patterns have been. And that's like, even if he is playing well. And then he did end up missing time with the left abductor. And I think that they're going to have to find a way to get him more minutes. I don't know if a Bogdanovich trade is in the cards, but I do think, that's probably something they'll explore, see if they can move on from Capella and clear some more minutes for these guys. But your point about the expectations for this team, where you said this is a transition year, I really want to get your thoughts on that because that's how I've approached the Hawks as well. But in general, I thought that this was a reset the books year for you guys, where it's like, okay, we there's just no way we can keep this team together. And in some ways, it may have felt like you hit the ceiling as currently constructed. Do you think from the front office perspective and like from what you've heard from, like, I guess reporters, whatever it may be, do you think that was the driving decision behind trading for Randall? And then like from a fan base perspective, like how have you guys viewed this season? Like I know I can imagine it could be frustrating, like going to the Western Conference Finals and then seemingly taking a step back. But sometimes I think, especially in this new era, you need to take a step back and take a step forward. And I think these front office that can realize, okay, this is a ceiling that we've hit. For example, like Boston, Marcus Smart, that was a huge fan favorite, Boston Celtics staple. They traded him because they realized they hit their ceiling. And then within a couple of seasons, they were in the finals again. And I'm not saying that's necessarily what's going to happen for Minnesota, but I think that's an example of like emotional attachment. Like I know how much Cat meant to the city, like all the stories I saw, how much he loved that city too. Like that's not an easy trade to make by any means, especially with how good he was playing and how good he's playing in New York. But I guess like what do you think drove that decision from the front office perspective? And like, how do you make peace with that decision, especially like seeing with the way he's playing in New York?
Yeah, I mean, so much of his stuff we don't even know because the ownership situation is crazy still. Like, there's still
Oh, I
court
forgot
dates.
about that. I definitely forgot. Yeah, I forgot. That's
It's
crazy.
it's that's the hardest part is that you can't really point a finger. You
Yeah,
can't point at ownership, you can't point at the GM, you can't really directly point at, like, CJ and Grant Williams, like, you can't point at CBA stuff. I
right.
think it's just a big mix of them all. You could only do what you wanted to do. I think the biggest frustration with the trade was how late it came, but and just Randall not seeming to be a great fit, but it's the player option at the end of the year. It's not like you're locked into some gigantic contract for the future. It's for sure question marks with that moving forward. But I mean, Dante really turned it around before he
Yep.
got injured. His 3-point numbers were up. He was looking more comfortable. They were finding him more catch and shoot looks. So like that part of it's great. But so much of it is just the financial stress. I mean, they still have, I believe, the second largest tax bill, and that's even with making the trade to knock it down. So
Mm.
and Nikhil's gonna be a free agent this offseason. Nas is gonna be a free agent offseason. Like those are two incredibly impactful players that have really, I mean, Nas is fully developed here, but Nikhil has fully found a home here. He's fully become the player he is. And I think those are just players you want to keep around. So a lot of it is still to be decided, but so much of it is taking risks. Like even with trading the two future firsts for Rob, I mean, it's a lot to do, but to trade in the top 10 of the draft when you don't have any like assets up there is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of it is going to be read and react, see how it goes, but they're at least trying to maneuver around things that are either control with the CBA, but also trying to extend the pathway around Ant, trying to figure out what works, seeing different options. I can't really be mad at them for like trying all these different options, and there's still so many more directions they can go. Like Tim Conley he does not sit on his hands. He makes things happen, which I enjoy. It's tough, but they're really trying to kind of make this work around Ant, and it's we're just gonna kind of have to see where it goes from here. Like, there's a lot of fun talent. There's a lot of things to still take from the rest of the season. I mean, the West is still really shaky outside of a couple teams, even so. Can still sneak like they still have that Pistons pick that is likely to convey with the way the Pistons are playing, and it's just going to be read and react, see how its season finishes, and I think they'll just be more added value if they can then sign like Nas, Nikhil, bring them back as a result of trading Cat. As much as that would just sucked, and it's tough to see, but I'm glad he's hooping in New York, and it's not in the conference, so you can't even like you just root
Yeah.
for them. It's easy. It's easy to root for them when you're not in your conference too,
Mm.
obviously.
It's also easy to root against them when they're not in your conference. So like I've very much enjoyed watching DeJounte and the Pelicans, and somewhat preying on their downfall. I was I was gonna say too. I think smart front offices are going to be very easily distinguished over the next couple of years, and so they have to be thinking 3, 4, 5 years in advance. It's always been like that, but I think it's the penalties are even more so. So I think that what you guys have done makes sense to me. And I'm kind of like finally at the point where I feel comfortable with the Hawks front office. Like that doesn't mean they're going to hit on every deal or they're going to hit on every extension or every roster decision, but
I got a
I have a
direction
general.
now.
Yeah, so I think the direction I can buy into the direction, I can buy into the overall evaluation of where we could be going. So um, I'm happy to hear that you guys have that some sort of like vision, even with the instability in the front office. Because I mean, I love Ant. I love watching. Like I think that team has the potential to be really electric. I'm a huge believer in Leonard Miller. I'm still a huge believer in Rob Dillingham, and so I think that there's going to be some deep cuts on that roster that people might forget about. And then hopefully, like if they get the chance to, they could really blossom. But look, man, I really, really appreciate you taking the time. Just want to make sure you plug where people can find you. I know we said at the top of the show, but where else could people get in contact or like see what you do?
Twitter at Huncho_Jman. And I'm also on Blue Sky, Huncho Jman. Right for zone coverage. And I got a new piece coming out about how weird the Wolves 3-point shooting is this week because they are number 1 in the league in above the break 3-point shooting percentage and 4th worst in corner. So I'm diving into that. They're almost shooting 40% from above the break as a team. It's crazy.
That's crazy. Yeah, we'll be tapping in for sure. I'll definitely we'll be reading that article. Again, thank you so much, Jonah. Y'all make sure y'all follow him on all platforms, and we'll see you in the next one.